and I previously served as the United States Ambassador to South Africa from 2022 to 2025. And one of the animating purposes of my life is Africa, to help drive the private sector-led development of Ethiopia and of the continent more broadly.
He's been a soldier, scholar, and a diplomat at the highest levels.
Serving as U.S. Ambassador to South Africa and the African Union.
Today, he leads Busara Advisors, a firm focused on connecting Africa to global investment and real economic growth.
Ambassador Reuben joins AGI podcast to talk leadership, development, and how Africa can truly own its future.
What do you plan to achieve with the advisory service?
By 2050, at least 1/4 of all of humanity will be African. And so Busara Advisors exists for the purpose of helping African companies engage the rest of the world and to navigate what is the most important and complex emerging market in the world.
You have chosen as areas for the continent Africa, and can you give me the justification or the reason behind those?
The real question is, where can you have the biggest impact soonest so that you can continue to grow and scale? So we decided to focus on 6 priority sectors at the beginning.
Do you really believe Africa can actually utilize the demographic dividend that we have in the near future and prosper?
I think it's an imperative. I think it simply has to. The UN estimates that every year there are 9 million new young Africans that enter working age, and the formal economy across the entirety of Africa only creates 3 million new jobs a year.
What do you think is the impact of all those things happening on Africa? Ambassador Reuben, welcome to the show.
Namaste.
All right. Amasagnalo is Amharic, so that's fantastic. That's a great thing to hear Amharic from an ambassador, an American ambassador. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, first, Abraham, it's great to be with you.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most important thing for your audience to know is that I'm married to an Ethiopian. So my wife, Dr. Leila Selassie, and I have been married for 23 years this year.
Wow.
We have 2 sons, Reuben, who is 20 years old, and Reda Alam, who is 18 years old. And we have a dog, and our dog is named Buna.
All right. Okay.
So we live just outside of Washington, D.C. in McLean, Virginia, an area with lots of Abisha.
Wow.
And I previously served as the United States Ambassador to South Africa from 2022 to 2025, as well as the U.S. Ambassador to the African Union here in Addis Ababa from 2013 to 2015. And currently, I am the president of Busara Advisors. We are a strategic advisory and commercial diplomacy firm focused exclusively on Africa. We help global clients do business in Africa, and we help African clients do business in the world.
Amazing. What do you plan to achieve with the advisory service?
So, first of all, the name of our firm, Busara, is a Swahili word, and it means wisdom. And we know that one of the most important stories of the 21st century is the demographic and commercial growth of Africa. So today, in 2026, there are about 1.5 billion people in Africa, and the average age is 19 years old. By mid-century, by 2050, which is not that far from now, 24 years from now, at least 1/4 of all of humanity will be African, and somewhere between 1/3 to almost 1/2 of the working age population of the planet will be African. Currently, Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa, and that growth rate will likely continue. It likely will continue to be so. And so we know that that is both an incredibly important commercial opportunity for Africa, for Africans, and for the world's engagement with Africa, but it's also, quite frankly, a challenge. And so Busara Advisors exists for the purpose of helping African companies engage the rest of the world, and for the purpose of helping other major companies outside of Africa to navigate this, what is the most important and complex emerging market in the world.
Amazing. I saw that you chose areas
For example, for Ethiopia, agriculture, tourism, mining, and ICT, those areas are the most significant areas to actually invest in. And we consider these areas to be the pillars of the economy. What you have chosen as areas for the continent Africa, and can you give me the justification or the reason behind those?
Sure. So our firm launched in January 2025, so we're just over a year old now. But the collective experience of our team spans into dozens of decades. And when you're beginning commercial enterprise, the real question is, where can you have the biggest impact soonest so that you can continue to grow and scale, and then decide where you want to engage elsewhere. So we decided to focus on 6 priority sectors at the beginning. Consumer goods, so things like everything from chips and beverages to electronics, things that you would buy. The creative industries, so movies, music, television, things of that nature. Energy, extractive industries like mining, technology and digital infrastructure, or ICT, and transportation and logistics. So there is some overlap with Ethiopia's priority sectors for growth, for example, in ICT, or either in transport and logistics, or extractive industries like mining. But there's some areas, you are correct, that are important both to Ethiopia and the rest of the continent, but we just have not decided to focus on them immediately. So things like healthcare or things like agriculture. So we chose to focus on our premium 6 because those are areas where we see the growth fastest, and where we know we can help support non-African investors come into the continent in the fastest possible way. So, but these other sectors that, like, for example, healthcare and agriculture, are crucially important, not simply as business enterprises, but crucially important for what one might call the human security of a continent. And there are other ways in which I am personally and my family are personally engaged. I'll give you a couple of examples. So my wife, Dr. Leila Selassie, is an intensive care doctor. So she works in the critical care wards of hospitals. And for the last 10 years, she's been working to create the very first of its kind private cancer treatment facility in Ethiopia.
Wow.
She's been working for 10 years to bring this about. Today is January 22nd, 2026, and they started seeing their first patients just last week. The clinic is called Kubur Desta Cancer Center. It's here in the Alam building here in Addis Ababa.
All right.
And that is a personal commitment of our family to help transform this particular sector of healthcare in Ethiopia. Personally, I cared passionately about education. And so I have previously sat on the board of directors of the African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg, and will continue in my personal capacity to support these other areas that are crucial for Africa's growth and for the development of its people.
Amazing. So you've been in the military, you've been in academia, you have that experience, a comprehensive experience of touching different things. Do you really believe those experiences helped your understanding of a business or the business world? Is there any particular knowledge or a skill that you gain from all those experiences?
Sure. Well, first of all, I love the movie Black Panther.
Amazing. Me too.
And the lead actor from the first movie, the late great Chadwick Boseman, once gave a speech in which he said that in life you need to understand your purpose because your purpose transcends disciplines. And one of the animating purposes of my life is Africa. I have been deeply engaged in Africa as a humanitarian, as a scholar, as a diplomat, and now as a businessman. So we say at our firm, Busara Advisors, we have 3 whys for why we do what we do: to grow jobs, to add value, and to spread dignity. Because we know that businesses create jobs, and we know that jobs create dignity. So as it relates to the breadth of my experiences in applying them to this commercial enterprise, I am very grateful to be able to bring a number of different perspectives to this particular purpose, which is to help drive the private sector-led development of Ethiopia and of the continent more broadly. One of the most important skill sets, quite frankly, that I bring is leadership. And leadership is a real skill. Leadership is the ability to bring people together to do things to solve a problem that they would not otherwise do. And you could have leadership in the military, you'd have leadership in universities, you could have leadership in diplomacy, and you could have leadership in business. The context may change, but the foundational principles are the same. I am very grateful to have been trained at one of the most important leadership crucibles in the United States, at the United States Naval Academy, where I learned some very, very important basic principles of leadership that I've applied in different contexts the entirety of my life. I'm grateful to have led the largest diplomatic mission in Africa, in South Africa, where I had to exert leadership in a wide variety of capacities. And I bring that same leadership skill set to the extraordinary team that we have here at Busara Advisors. The second skill set that I've learned how to apply is strategy. So how do you identify what your objectives are? How do you identify the resources you need to achieve those objectives, and how do you deploy those resources in the most efficient way so that they are impactful? And so that is all any business does, whether that is you're running a small shop in Mercado or you're leading a multi-billion-dollar business. It's applying that same skill set. It's simply a matter of scale.
Any particular region in Africa that you're focusing on?
So Busara Advisors is unique certainly amongst American strategic advisory firms in the sense that we have full-time regional staff in every major commercial hub on the continent. Here in Addis Ababa, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Cape Town, and also in Lagos. We recently have had staff in Abidjan, and we will likely add there to Abidjan again. As well as a fully staffed office in Washington, D.C., and also in Atlanta, Georgia. And so all of our full-time regional staff also have remits beyond the country in which they were placed. So, for example, our colleagues in South Africa can work all throughout SADC. Our colleagues here in Kenya and also in Ethiopia can go as far as Uganda or Tanzania, depending on the needs of our clients. Obviously, our colleagues in Lagos can go to Ghana, can go to Togo, can go to Benin, et cetera. And so it all depends on what the needs of our clients are and how we can support them wherever they are.
I take it like you've met different people, great people. You've worked with great minds in the world, both from the US and as a continent, including Africa. I have in my mind President Obama because he's really famous in Ethiopia and Africa too. So is there any lesson that you learned from these great individuals? And can you tell me if there is a particular lesson that you have retained and that you can share with the young people of Africa?
Yes. I have had the great privilege at sitting at the feet, as it were, of many great leaders and working for many and learning from them. And I will tell you some very important lessons that I've learned. The first is that they get the basics right. The most basic things that anybody can do, whether you're in university or whether you're in high school or whether you're leading a multi-billion-dollar organization. They are on time. They are focused on detail. They are focused on excellence, and they are focused on consistency. Showing up and being good over and over and over again. It's very important. Another thing that all of the great leaders I've engaged in do, they have what in America we call grit, meaning the ability to take a difficult challenge and persist even when things are hard, especially when things are hard. Two other very important lessons that I've learned is that every great leader I've been around is deeply focused on the people that they lead. They're very humane. And although they are focused on the mission, they're also very much focused on the caretaking of the people with whom they work. And the final thing that I will say is that they are able to articulate a vision. So they are able to paint a picture, an aspiring picture for their organization about where they can take them and inspire people to follow them. And so I have tried to apply all of those lessons over the course of my professional life. And like any human being, sometimes I've been better at them, sometimes not as good, but you have grit.
Definitely.
And you keep persisting and try to get better over time.
Okay. As I was preparing myself for this interview, I read a different research saying I watched interviews, including yours. So people talk about Africa and they relate doing business in Africa and the challenges of doing business in Africa. And they have some kind of solutions. They talk about the solutions. They suggest this and that. But mostly I find those solutions being not actually tailored to what we practice in the continent, traditional ways and other things. What challenges do you think you'll be facing in Africa? Because it's only 1 year that since you've been into the business world, coming into Africa. What are the challenges that you are thinking of tackling, and how are you planning to tackle those challenges?
Sure. Well, the first biggest challenge is simply a matter of scale. The continent of Africa is 3 times as big as the continental United States of America. And so just that sheer size has serious implication for some businesses, everything that deals with, for example, logistics, supply chains, anything movement. Interestingly enough, it doesn't have as much to deal with ICT or things that can be done electronically. Right? But mainly when you're talking about the physical movement of goods of people, that is a big challenge. Another challenge is the sheer number of countries and the different regulatory environments you have. So there are at least, 54 sovereign countries, 55, depending on how you think about Western Sahara, with different linguistic environments. And so that is also, quite frankly, our insight at Busara Advisors. There are many American strategic advisory firms that operate all over the world. Not a single one of those firms have a full-time presence anywhere in Africa. So we raised a significant amount of money in pre-seed capital so that we could hire an extraordinary team of commercial diplomats across the continent, because we believe that you cannot be successful during commercial diplomacy unless you are physically here. That is vitally important. And as we grow, we will be able to grow our capacity to support other clients in multiple markets. Another issue that we think we are uniquely positioned to address is that of narrative. So because we're across the continent, because we employ people that are deeply familiar with trends across the continent, not only as Africans, but as non-Africans who've worked across the continent, we believe that we are uniquely positioned to translate the value proposition and give a realistic perception of risk that is sometimes overindulged outside of Africa, meaning that people think that it's riskier than it actually is, because all they know is what they see on CNN, but they're actually not sort of spending here on the time. They don't know that people like you and people like your listeners. And so we are uniquely positioned to be able to articulate the value of certain investments, the value of certain business propositions in ways that hopefully will attract more investment and more business operations outside of Africa here to the continent.
I hear you talk about the demography of the continent, the young people of the continent, and I believe you have hope that this demography that we have within the continent, including Ethiopia, and I see some kind of optimism, but there are issues that we see that you can observe. For example, the skill development is one thing, and education. You've mentioned a lot about education and your interest about it. Do you really believe Africa can actually harness the demographic dividend that we have in the near future and prosper?
I think it's an imperative. I think it simply has to. I'll tell you a story. In 2014, when I was ambassador to the African Union, we had a senior U.S. government official come here to Addis Ababa who was meeting with a senior African official. I won't tell you the names of either one.
All right.
But what I will say is the senior American said to the senior African, "What can we, America, do for you, your particular country?" And that African leader could have said anything. Could have said, "Give us more visas for travel." Could have said, "Give us more military equipment." You know what he said? He said, "Help us create more jobs for our young people." Because 12 years ago, when this conversation happened, this particular leader understood that not only the health and welfare, but the political stability of their country depended on creating more employment across Africa. The UN estimates that every year there are 9 million new young Africans that enter working age, and the formal economy across the entirety of Africa only creates 3 million new jobs a year. So that is a 6 million job deficit annually in the formal economy that simply has to be addressed. Now, what's the good news of that dark story? There are several pieces of good news. The first piece of good news is that there is increasing interest in investing in Africa across the world, from Europe, from the Gulf, obviously from East Asia, and we're seeing increasing interest in the United States. The second is that we now have greater forms of technology that make entrepreneurship much more possible than we ever had before. Everything from mobile money that makes it much more easy to process banks and therefore support entrepreneurs, to greater connectivity to share ideas. And the third thing is the real bet, and that is the vitality and creativity of young people. You know, there is a pretty substantial gap between the age of most of the leaders of the continent across most of Africa and the average age of most of the populations they lead. And in many cases, that gap is being filled by young people simply taking their economic futures into their own hands. Whether it's in the creative economy and, from Amapiano and Afrobeats that are now popular the world over, to taking lessons from their peers all around the world to find new ways to apply modern technology to their current problems. And so the real question is, how can governments become much more agile and meet their young people where they are and create an enabling environment for those young people to launch their creativity, and also for governments to create the enabling environment where large-scale businesses can come, see realize profits with their ideas, and be confident that their investments will endure for the long haul.
Amazing. If you're at liberty to talk about this issue, because a lot is happening in the world, but I want to ask this question in relation to the impact of it to Africa. Of course, I'm talking about the geopolitics and everything happening in the world, especially things that are happening in the West and other places in the world. So what is the impact of all those things happening in the other part of the world on Africa? Because mostly we actually receive at this part of the continent, whatever happens in the West or whatever happens in the East, the bad effect of that comes to Africa. We assume the bad effect of, talk about climate change and other things. We are affected by all those issues. And now there is a geopolitics and issues, conflicts happening everywhere. So what do you think is the impact of all those things happening on Africa?
Sure. Well, of course, you're correct that this is an incredibly disruptive time in the global order, in world politics. The Prime Minister of Canada just gave a speech at Davos a couple of days ago in which he said that what we are seeing is a rupture in the international order. And everybody will be making their respective judgments on what that means for their respective countries and their populations. I would submit that in this particular time, it is very important for individual African countries, for a collective of African regional countries, and for the African Union itself to remain laser focused on one issue, and that is their development. And to identify the best partners for them that will help their economies develop and that will help their people benefit from that economic growth and that socioeconomic transformation. Now, I know that is easier said than done, particularly as there are pressures from various powers outside Africa. But here's the good news. The good news is that we are now 60 years beyond the end of colonialism across the vast majority of Africa. That's at least 2 generations. And with a third generation coming along. And given that Africa has its agency, Africa can choose with whom it wishes to partner. Africa can choose how to apply its own internal resources. Africa can choose how it wants to govern itself. And not only can it choose, that is how other countries that were more developing countries 50 years ago have made the leap into the class of developed countries. In 1960, South Korea and Ghana had the same GDP. Now South Korea is one of the most important economies, the 8th largest economy in the world, and is a net donor of foreign assistance as opposed to a net recipient. In 1968, China was going through the Cultural Revolution and was tearing itself apart. We are now in the first quarter of the 21st century, where the growth of China is without question one of the most important stories of geopolitics that everybody else, including the United States, my country, is going to have to figure out how to reckon with. And so the question for Africa, individually and collectively, is how does it own its own future? How does it be strategic? And how does it be relentless in focusing on its own development and insisting on best governance for itself?
Amazing. So this is going to be my last question. What is the immediate next for your organization, Busara?
Sure. So, one of the things that we do at Busara is that we have engaged a handful of African governments, and we said, look, we want to help you develop your private sector economic growth strategy. And we as a company will not charge one penny, not one dime, not one birr to you as a government. We want to understand what your priority projects are. We will then go help find both the investors and the operators for those projects. We will get paid by the private sector. All we ask is that you, government, promise to work with us to work through the inevitable challenges that these operators will have when they enter your government. You, government, get the investment you want and the job creation you want. Their private sector gets a bankable project. We get compensated by their private sector. Everybody benefits. We have signed that memorandum of agreement with the government of Zambia. We signed it at the Zambian embassy in Washington in December. We would be honored to be able to have a similar agreement with Ethiopia. And we are in discussions with a couple of other governments as well. And so watch this space. We'll see what happens.
Amazing. Ambassador Reuben, this has been an honor for me to have this conversation, and I learned a lot. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Abraham.
All right.